In this video, we are going to be looking at installing this AGF-RC servo into this TRX-4M to see if it improves the steering on the truck. To be clear, I actually haven't had any issues with the steering on this TRX-4M so far, but I've had pretty good luck with these AGF-RC servos, and I want to see if this actually makes an upgrade or not. So let's get into some initial tests of how this does. Then we're going to go straight into the install. First thing we want to test is the speed of the servo. To test the strength of the servo, I'm actually going to wedge it between the wall and this metal stand, and I'm going to hold it so that the metal stand can't move. And the question is going to be, does it actually move the rear of the truck over or not? So it does wiggle it just barely. I can barely get my finger back in that gap. The servo install should be pretty straightforward. We're going to start by taking this front and rear screw out of the servo from its mount. With that free, with those two screws free, the servo now has enough movement. I can rock it back and actually get my 2mm driver right in here to get the servo horn off. The servo now just slides out of the way, no issue. But now we need to get all of these wires out of this bundle and disconnected all the way up through this servo position right here, which means we have at least 2 zip ties that we need to cut, and we need to fish it out of this path that it goes in. Looking at the two servos side by side, they're physically almost the same size, but the AGF-RC servo is slightly bigger. The hole spacing is just ever so slightly wider, and it is, from flange down, actually noticeably taller also. Checking in on install also, as we come here, you'll see the AGF-R servo so slightly shorter wire. We may have to do a little finagling with how we navigate the wiring through the chassis. Now, in order to get this to install down here in the chassis, my understanding, the only thing we're going to have to do is take our side cutters and trim off this little tab. And then as you go to put the screws in, you just install them lightly from a distance and they will go in. But the other thing that we're going to have to check now is the spline count here on the top of the servo is different. This is a larger diameter on the Traxxas than it is on the AGF-RC, which means we're going to have to use one of these installed servo horns that it comes with from its kit. We want a servo horn that's roughly the same length as what came from the Traxxas stock. And as I look at this servo horn that comes in the kit, using about that second hole out should be fine. I'm going to put it on there full with the full horn on it, and then after we confirm servo throw and all this other kind of stuff in endpoints, I will give myself room to adjust and or trim that off. The servo mounted up beautifully, actually. No issues whatsoever. I literally just screwed it straight down. So even though it was slightly bigger, there's enough slop in everything that it was able to screw in. Servo horn is on, but not attached yet. So I need to run the wire back to the receiver and get that all tucked in and cleaned up, and then we need to screw the linkage onto the servo horn itself. And one thing that I'm noticing is, maybe due to a little bit of just the dimension change, it looks like this linkage is not going to be straight. Looks like it is going to want to come up. I'm going to try to find a little spacer to put in here in order to help it space off just slightly. And the other thing is, the holes that are in this servo horn are actually too small for the screw that it came with. So I need to drill it out just ever so slightly, open that hole up to allow this screw to go in there. To get this servo to mount up, I just used a small little rubber grommet that I had, because rarely throw things away. And I had to drill the hole in the servo horn to 5/64 in order to let that screw actually go through there. Lastly, as I noted earlier, this wire was slightly shorter, so I was able to get it to feed through most of this area, but then I skipped this little area where the wire went through initially. But then even then, it would barely fit. It would barely get to the ESC. So one of the things I've seen a couple people do now is they actually move this whole mechanism forward one hole. So there's actually 3 holes in the chassis here. Loosen the shock, take these 2 screws off on either side, and this whole part moves forward. I was able to do that, and then this wire now fits and I don't need an extension. So let's get a battery in this and actually test it compared to what we saw with the stock servo. So there you go, installing the servo in this crawler. Really pretty straightforward, but it's not without a little bit of work that you need to do. Trimming off those tabs, moving the ESC forward a little bit, drilling out and replacing the servo horn, all required to get it to go in. It does seem like, side by side, it does seem like it might be a little bit faster, a little bit more powerful. I didn't notice on the rear end move, the power move, I didn't really notice any difference there, but otherwise it does seem a little bit better. And the good news is this whole servo is actually cheaper than the stock servo. So if you do end up breaking the stock servo in your Traxxas, you have actually save about 10 bucks, save about a third of the cost compared to the stock servo, and you might have a little bit of an upgrade. So hope this video was useful for you. If you want to, feel free. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask me down in the comments. Otherwise, I have a whole TRX-4M playlist over here to your right. You can go check that out there. Thank you and goodbye.